All right, everybody, I think we'll get started. Thanks for joining me. Hopefully, post-lunch, we're not too sleepy, so I'll try not to put you to bed. But thanks for coming. I'm going to juggle a little bit because I'm going to end up doing a demo sitting down, so don't mind me going back and forth to move the slides. Anyway, my name is Frank Pandolfe. I am the product manager of the Healthcare Action Engine. It is our alert and notification workflow engine. I've been at InterSystems for about 4.5 years now. I am a physician by background and actually continue to still practice part-time. And I'm also have clinical informatics training. So yeah, let's get going. All right, so this is our scenario. So a physician is seeing a patient, Marla Gonzalez, in the clinic, and when I go and see her, or the clinician is seeing her, there are a number of quality measures that she's probably eligible for, gaps in care, things that are guidelines that should be adhered to make sure that she's getting appropriate care and management. One of the issues is there's a lot of data in her records, and so I have to sort through all of that. And all this data may be coming from multiple different sources and locations, and I have a limited amount of time, so this presents a challenge for me. The idea is here that luckily I have the Healthcare Action Engine, and when I am working in the chart and I open her chart up, it makes an API call out to the Healthcare Action Engine, which processes a number of rules and returns the result back to me in real time. So this is real-time processing of all the data in her chart. And if you saw the keynote, we were focusing on osteoporosis. That was one of the themes for this year. So I can see that she's at high risk for osteoporotic fracture, and then I can do something while she's sitting there in front of me. So really, what is the Healthcare Action Engine? As I said, it's really our alert and notification workflow management solution. Really, it's broken down into a number of components. We break it down into triggers. So this is the action at some point within the clinical workflow that you want to call some rules. It calls those relevant rules. Those rules gather data in order to process it, and then returns the result so we can take action based on those results. And so it provides that API solution for it and houses all the rules, so it also really can help be a knowledge management solution. You can organize and store all the rules. You can even import rules from other workflow engines, things that require, and I'll talk a little bit about this a bit later. But if you have different execution engines, we can import those rules. It also, we have our native rule builder and rule execution engine, and I'll show you how that works in the demo. And the last bullet mentions the idea of being able to pull in and house other rules. So if people are familiar with CQL or clinical quality language, this is a rule execution engine that is an open source project. It's part of HL7 standard. NCQA is writing some of their HEDIS measures in this, and that's the direction that they're moving towards. CMS is also writing, or starting to write some of their measures in that as well. We're also seeing some international interest around CQL. So, you can, it's meant to be able to integrate multiple different rule execution engines. So speaking of our native rule authoring tool, what kind of rules can you author? Well, essentially, if you can extract the data out of a FHIR server with a FHIR search, you can write a rule against that. So that includes claims data, any medical diagnosis data, radiology reports, lab data, observational data like blood pressures or lab results, and medication data. So and there are 142-ish FHIR resources, so essentially anything that the FHIR search parameter supports, we can dig up, given that it's actually, you have data in that format. So let me describe the workflow for this. So we call this the synchronous workflow, and we've built this technology on top of another HL7 standard called CDS hooks. It is the way that this works is, I sort of mentioned this trigger, so there are a number of predefined triggers within the standard, one of them being patient view. So the idea is that one point within the clinician workflow, when the clinician opens up the chart, an API call can be made out. So it's done, in this case, to the action engine. So it calls a number of specific rules, and those rules, it can either be handed the data to execute the rule, or it can be sort of handed the location of a FHIR server to go and grab the data that rule needs in order to execute. And then it returns the result back to the clinician in the form of something called the CDS hooks card, which is essentially just a JSON packet, and it's up to the client application, typically in EHR, but it could be a number of other different potential client applications, to render that result, that card, within its own look and feel. And finally, this wasn't part of the original CDS hook standard, but this is added in some of the later versions, is something called feedback. So this is the idea, is that you can collect information about what the clinician did with that information that was given to them. Did they ignore it? Did they override it? Did they accept one of your suggestions? And this is really important later when trying to figure out basically your decision support, your rule performance. So if your clinicians are overriding the rule, 99% of the time, then you're likely causing them upset, and if they keep having to ignore it and things like that, then you probably should look at the rule itself, either pull it, rewrite it, figure out what's going wrong. So you make that acceptance rate, you make it useful to the clinicians, right? You don't want to make it so they just close it down at whatever cost and stop reading all of the notifications you're trying to do to help them do their job better. All right. So one of the benefits of this architecture is that you can really author the rule once and deploy it in multiple environments. So for instance, this osteoporosis rule, the rule is written against a FHIR spec as opposed to a data source. So when you go and create a rule, you write a rule like an R4 rule, or you write a US core rule. And then you can look for that data in any source that supports data in that format. So this makes the authoring, the updating, the administration, the rollout, deployment, all that kind of stuff much faster, so that as the rules change and evolve, because they do, keeping all of that kind of stuff up to date, you no longer have to maintain 4 different osteoporosis rules in 4 different environments and 4 different deployment methods. The overhead of administration is much less in this model. So one of the advantages or a few of the advantages here of the Healthcare Action Engine is we've really spent a lot of time. This is essentially a brand new product, and so we've gotten to design it from the ground up and really focused on an intuitive user interface. As I've sort of started to mention, it's built and has considerations for a number of the standards out there. It enables the fast and easy writing of different rules, and I'll show you how we do that. It's a FHIR first solution, it is vendor agnostic, and it's also FHIR endpoint agnostic. So whether or not you're using InterSystems FHIR server, or Epic's FHIR server, or your FHIR server is on one of the other cloud providers, it still works with it. So so that's an important point in terms of offering this really as a sort of a service-based architecture. So all of these type of things help really create higher quality notifications. You really get a shorter time to value and lower administrative overhead with this. So I'll jump into the demo and show you the application itself. So bear with me. Let's see if this works. And hopefully I'm still logged into the VPN. So this is the landing page for the Healthcare Action Engine. It just, I don't expect you to read this, but it tells you just a little bit about how the workflow works. And also let me make this a little bigger so people can see it. So as you can see, we've sort of broken it out into the synchronous workflow. So again, it's the idea of a trigger, a rule, and a card. The triggers here, we have just a library of them. These are the ones that the standard defines by default. These are common, like, again, patient view, order select. So that's, essentially putting an order into the shopping cart and order sign. So these are some of the ones, again, that are predefined. It is extensible, so if you had a custom trigger, you could write that. We haven't really had anybody in the need of custom triggers yet. The CDS hook standard is still fairly new and being adopted, so a lot of people are just trying to get the basics down rather than really extend it at this point. But we've built in that optionality. And I'm actually going to jump a little to the sort of last part, and that's the card. And again, this is just a JSON packet that is returned to the clinician with sort of the result of the rule. And I will show you an example of one of these. Let's see. Here's one that I had written. And if I can show you that this is what we show in terms of the JSON packet. So you could spend your time and write the JSON if you really wanted to, but you'd have to remember what are the fields that are required by the spec, which ones are optional. If there's nesting that's involved in adding a number of fields, then you'd have to remember to put all your curly braces in the right point. So we decide that this is there if you really want it, but we help guide you through the process within a fairly easy user interface. So we allow you to do that. Again, just following sort of the ethos of this low-code, no-code idea. And one of the things that I'll point out while I'm here is that there is an option actually to provide even links to Smart on FHIR apps. So you can, in this workflow, a lot of people have these really great Smart on FHIR apps, but the problem is nobody knows that they're there or where to find them or use them at the appropriate time. You can actually use CDS hooks in this workflow engine to really remind people in the appropriate clinical situations that there's an app here that you could use. So I was just talking to somebody who was doing a Smart on FHIR app for nutrition, and so the idea is that if somebody had like a low BMI, you could do a rule that if the patient had low BMI, return this card with a link to the app, and it's going to bring up this thing about nutrition counseling and dietary management and so forth. So really, again, trying to take advantage of all the hard work that other people have also done. So let's go back, and I'll show you the rule editor. I think this is actually one of the most, it's probably the piece that I'm most proud of. I think it's a really cool idea, and let me find one of the rules that I wanted to show. This is one that I commonly show. I wrote this rule to this is a CMS rule that basically the guideline says that if a patient has a history of systolic heart failure, that they should be on this type of medication called an ACE or an ARB. And so so the way that this is structured is that if each one of these conditions is met, then we return this card. As I sort of showed you in the prior screen, that's how we construct these cards, so we attach them here. Just to point out that up here we have what we call an assign function, or you can think of this as a global variable. So if, for instance, I had multiple sections or subsections of this rule, and I wanted to use this expression of not on ACE or NARB, I could define it once at top and then reference it multiple times, so I don't have to keep rewriting it. That's the purpose of this up here. But I'll delete this one of having systolic heart failure, and I show you how I actually create it. So to do it, I create a new expression, and the way that I sort of mentioned earlier is we look for information within the patient chart based on a FHIR search query. And so I will name it. So has systolic heart failure. And then here you can see all of the actually FHIR resources that I could write queries against. So these are all of them. And again, this is defined by the spec. So this, I can show you, but this, again, when we created this rule, we chose that this was going to be an R4 rule. So these are all of the R4 resources. In any case, systolic heart failure is a condition, if I remember my medicine a little bit. And that condition is defined by a code. And because of the zoom, it's down here. And that code is further defined by a coding system. So, ICD-10, ICD-9, SNOMED, these are all common coding systems. This list we pre-populate, but there's something in our settings where you could change these, add them, delete them, whatnot. So you can add the various ICD-10 codes that you are looking for the patient. I don't remember them off the top of my head, but you can comma separate them. And even if your data contains both a mix of ICD-9 and ICD-10 codes, you can essentially create this massive OR statement of all of these as well. And so what is really cool is that what this is doing in the background, aside from actually just guiding you through the appropriate resources and then the elements within that resource, it creates this FHIR search query. So again, this isn't, in a sense, isn't magic. You could go and write this FHIR search parameter if you wanted to, but it's pretty dense. You would have to really have a software engineer who would be able to write this statement, and that software engineer would have to know the FHIR structure pretty deeply. So we think that that's, FHIR is awesome, but it is, sometimes it's a little hard to get started with. There's a steep learning curve, and especially for software engineers, this is not their area of expertise, and to find those software engineers who know FHIR really well can be quite expensive. So we want to save you time and money, and we allow, the idea is to allow the analysts to be able to construct these rules up. So again, this is what the rule editor is doing in the background. But you just click OK, and it's added here. So this is a fairly simple expression. I'm going to close this one, and I'll open another one that I had done for demonstration purposes. This one I constructed for a prior authorization. So I don't expect that you guys will have to read every expression in here, but the idea is to show that you can have very complex, deeply nested structures with multiple potential different cards that are returned. So this actually only took me a couple hours to write. And a couple hours may sound like a long time, but it probably would take somebody a week to write this in other types of platforms. So you can do quite powerful logic within the rule editor. It's really quite flexible. So I think that at that point, I'm going to wrap the demo. I'm also happy, well, I'll wait till the end to take questions, so I will finish up, but happy to take questions about that. All right. So, you may be saying, hopefully, how can I get the healthcare action engine? But before I do that, I want to mention that the action engine is really intended at this point for single patient evaluation. So the idea is that you're running this logic on one patient's data at a time, and you're returning that. There are potentially other ways to automate that process and run it over a limited set of patients. But really the HealthShare Health Insight and our analytics solution builder is really our solutions for population level population management. But the action engine is available now for HealthShare UCR customers, and it is a supported feature, and it doesn't cost you any extra money, so that's nice. It's free for you. It is a separate license. It's a separate instance. As I mentioned, there's no additional cost for the license. And because it's actually on its own instance, it's compatible back to UCR 20.2. So the upgrade cycle is removed from the typical HealthShare UCR upgrade cycle. It's a separate thing. So the interface that supports it and the security model can be used back to the UCR 20.2 version. And we're offering it now for other customers other than Unified Care Record customers as an early adopter program or early access program. So if you are interested in that, there are QR codes around, or you can just come talk to me. It's posted on our website in terms of how to get involved in the early access program. Want to talk a little bit about where we're going with the Healthcare Action Engine. So we talked a little bit about, we can collect all this information from what the clinician is doing with the information that's presented to them, that card. And so that gets fed back, and right now we're just collecting it in some tables, but we figured it would be really nice to have some visual cues and make it easier to do that analytics. So we'll be creating this dashboard that has a number of different views, and this way you can easily see, how often different rules are firing. Are they firing consistently and then dropped off for some reason or really spiked up, or what the override rate is, those sorts of things. So we'll be working on that, and there'll be a number of different filters so you can see it over various different time periods and cut it in different ways. And then, as I mentioned, we're also working on CQL. So this is the idea of it's another rule execution engine, and we're really putting it into the workflow piece of the Healthcare Action Engine. So the rule editor that I showed you is our native rule builder and execution engine, but we'll also support importing other ones. CQL is probably the first one that we'll be working on. And that way, potentially a HEDIS measure that NCQA has written, you'll be able to call the qualified HEDIS measure in real time so the clinician can see that result and close that gap of care at the point that the patient is in front of them. So, you'll still be able to use, the typical HEDIS measures, run your quarterly reports, but, this may cut down that time where you create that report, you try to get your case managers to track the patient down one way or another, get them in the office to get a screening, all that kind of stuff. You can, if you have that patient in front of you, that's the best time to intervene. So that's one of the things that we're aiming for with that project. And then sort of the next big phase is asynchronous or push notifications. So the action engine right now is sort of a call and response or synchronous workflow, but the idea here is that events are happening in other places outside the direct clinician workflow. So new admissions are happening, new lab events are happening, maybe a new diagnosis is put into the chart, and then you may want to run some logic based on that event happening. So, we'll use the same framework of the rule engine and, the layout. And then, once you figure out, hey, there's something important here, the next question is, well, who do I want to let know about this? So, we'll have some logic to determine, who should who should get this notification? Is it the PCP, or is it a care manager, or is it the infectious disease doctor, something of that nature. So there will be some logic to figure out who the right person to send it to. And then how do you want to send it out? So, is this a non-urgent informational alert, and it can go into somebody's inbox, either their email inbox or their EHR inbox, and it can be looked at the next day or within the next few days? Or is it a urgent message, and you want to get it pushed to somebody's phone right away so that they're aware of it? So the card information has sort of 3 levels of criticality, so we'll be able to sort of filter on that, and there'll be options to determine what methodology people get notified of those alerts. So that feature is coming this fall as an early adopter program or early access program. So let me know also if you're interested in trialing the asynchronous, the push notifications, and we're aiming to release it generally in 2024. It will be the way that it will work, the way that the Action Engine becomes aware of these notifications will be in a couple of different ways. For HealthShare customers, the system index, we've built sort of a listener or feeder from the system index to be able to feed us those events on like a pub-sub model. And that's actually modeled after FHIR subscription R5. So FHIR subscriptions changed significantly between the R4 and R5 version, and R5 just dropped, so we don't expect that a lot of people will have R5 subscriptions up and running quite yet, but hopefully in about a year from now, that starts to become a reality. So you'll be able to use that feature to be able to become so that the Action Engine becomes aware of these things, and that will essentially make it a independent, again, of HealthShare customers, for HealthShare customers. Obviously, it'll work in sort of both scenarios. So that's actually all I have, I think, at this time. The IRIS people asked me to throw this QR code up there, so if you're interested in doing a health tutorial, then you can click that on your phone. Otherwise, I'm happy to take questions or show other parts of the rule editor if people have questions on how it works. Oh, yep. So I'm going to repeat the questions for for the recording. But in terms of, you said source code repository, so like version control, is that? Yeah. So we haven't done as much at this point in terms of version control. IRIS has its own version control, I think what they call CCR, and to be honest, we just haven't gotten there, so you can sort of track changes over time. But yeah, that would be nice to see. We do keep timestamps of who changed it and when they changed it and things like that. But yeah, to sort of roll back or things of that nature, it's on our list of things to do. There's, as you know, there's never it never ends. Oh, we'll give you a mic here.
Can you show me the trigger for, let's say, a patient? Can you show how you set that up?
Say that again, a trigger for?
The trigger when you want to trigger, let's say, a patient trigger. Just show what that looks like.
A patient trigger to show the last?
Yeah, the hook.
I'm not sure if I...
So go to the triggers and then, let me see how you set that up. Pick one of those.
Oh, so the way that it works is, so we tie the trigger directly to the rule. So when you actually create a new rule, you choose the type of trigger that the rule is based upon. Those triggers were standard out of the box? Yeah, those triggers are the ones that CDS hooks sort of defines. At this point, we don't. It's in a background setting if you actually want to create a brand new trigger. But at this point, we just use the sort of standard out-of-the-box ones.
I have a couple questions. On the, you were showing some upcoming features. You were talking about CQL as an action, as a rule engine. You also had Iris Object Script at the bottom on that list. It was in that image. Is that something that's currently available, or is that something that's coming?
Sorry, that was on the bottom from.
Yeah, on the screen that you had where you were showing the on the slide. If you go back a couple of slides. Yeah, down at the bottom. Oh, go back.
Yeah.
Down at the bottom, you have this says Iris Object Script, right? In the rule engine column, is that currently available, or is that something that's coming?
These Iris for Health things?
Well, so there's Iris for Health, and then at the bottom it says Object Script separately.
Oh, Object Script. So, yeah, what this means is, yes, you can, if you wanted to forgo the rule editor, you could write your own rules in Object Script and insert them in here. So we do support that as well.
And that's currently available?
Currently available, yeah.
Because I know this is an upcoming slide, so.
Yeah. And I didn't, right. So the platform is built for, again, different execution engines. And so, yes, we do, if you want to go and hard code your own rules in Object Script, yes, you can do that and bring them into the library.
Okay. Next question, and maybe you partially answered this talking about the push notifications, but in the actual action engine, like the rule editor, the only available action was return, or at least the only one that we could see. Are you planning on adding more available actions after something is triggered?
So I think that's a good question, and there are a number of different ways. So right now, the result of a rule returns a card. Again, since these are all API-driven, one of the things that we've had actually some of our sales engineers start to experiment is instead of using it in the sort of typical way, you could start to write what I would call like a virtual agent. So you could write a little script that essentially made the API call, got the card as a result, and parsed it. And based on that result, you could take further actions. We can do you could do things like add a patient to, some sort of queue or list, or do something further with that. So yeah, you can start to break down the different pieces and call the APIs, in an engineering way, for sure.
Okay, so it's always going to be a loop back to the calling. There's no redirection of a notification, for example. Like you say it with the asynchronous with the push piece, yes.
Yeah.
But triggering another process or something to that effect.
Yeah, you can. The card. So there are, and we haven't. So there are other things, in terms of, and we don't really show. Let's see if I can potentially answer this as well. Is that in the card structure, there is this thing called, so there are suggestions of what a clinician may do, and you can add actions to those suggestions. So that card could return, again, say, you should prescribe this medication, and you can actually use this, and we haven't built this out as much in the UI, but you can actually type in a FHIR command, and it can prompt further action. Like it can actually write a draft script or a draft order for that medication.
And my last question, I promise. When you pulled up all the FHIR resources, right? You said it was based on R4. Does that support schemas with FHIR extensions, or is that just a preloaded list of R4 or whatever?
So the way that we do that is that we have essentially a library that we call from, and it contains all the metadata related to R4. So essentially when R5, at this point, we haven't done it quite yet, but there's no technical reason. But we can just essentially download the R5 spec from the website, pull it into our library, and it will just parse that and pull it up. So it's something that we don't do any further processing. So all of those things are defined by the FHIR specification. I don't know if that helps. Or
so if I'm with an organization that has an implementation guide that has defined some FHIR extensions, I could go to that IG and download their.
So yeah, the way that we support things like US Core as well, and the way that we do that, I also have my technical lead here in case I get myself into trouble, but the way that we do that is at sort of a package level. So US Core, for instance, defines a number of different profiles and constraints on those resources, and so they get rolled up. So, I can't remember how many different ones, maybe 40 or so in US Core, and those get rolled up into, each one of those profile definitions get rolled up into a package, and then we load at that level. So yeah, you can load essentially like US Core, or I think we've started to look at like DaVinci prior auth, so they, I think, have their own sort of profile set of definitions, so you could do that to write against the specific profile.
Okay, thank you.
Would the trigger ever support like a request, in the sense that, for example, we have an application that's downstream from the EMR. The EMR is the one accessing the patient, and they want to, and we would think that we'd want to return a CDS hook card with a URL to pop up in the EMR. So how do the triggers work, and would they ever, is it a request from, can it be a request from another upstream system?
Yeah, so it's an API call, it's OAuth and things of that nature, and a resource, or the link to a FHIR resource server. So it doesn't have to be an EHR. Anything that sort of supports that authentication and API call can do that. So we can do that with like a patient portal, and so you can put this within a patient portal and make those calls, or if you set up your downstream application to make those calls to the Action Engine, you could do that.
So would this require support from the upstream system then, like Epic?
So there are essentially two pieces. There's the Healthcare Action Engine, which is the sort of service endpoint. It houses all the rules, and you call the rules. And then there's the client application, and that can be any number of different things. We've made our clinical viewer a client application, an EHR can be a client application, a patient portal can be a client application. So as long as it supports the API calls, then it can call us. So yeah, you could. It doesn't have to initiate from an EHR, I guess is what I'm saying.
Yeah, because it sounds like we would be the client application that's running Iris and doing the rules and responding with a card, but the trigger would be outside of our application. So I'm not sure how they would make that request into us.
Yeah, I'm not. We can maybe chat after it, and I can help understand it a little bit better.
Thank you.
Yep.
So my question is, can we feed Healthcare Action Engine, like our request, like add update hub request with SDA, which has like admit message with certain diagnosis? Can we feed those messages to Healthcare Action Engine and use these roles to send alerts to our client?
So if I understand, can we use SDA to trigger the Action Engine?
Correct.
And then are you talking and send further like notifications out and things like that? So yeah, we have done that. And I think that these are good use cases. Most of this is FHIR based, and that's the intention of it. But we have gotten it working for SDA as well. But that's ties it certainly to health share, and we've been trying to remain agnostic, essentially, but we do have essentially special love in our hearts for health share, so we make exceptions to make it work with that. And yeah, we can work on how we get that information out of UCR and make our application, make the action engine aware of those applications, those events happening.
Right, so those messages will be like a trigger event for us, like admit message has certain diagnosis and we want to send alert to primary care or,
Yeah, I think if I understand, you can, if there's a diagnosis message or an event that's happening in SDA, one of the other things that we could do is with Unified Care Record is now with the system index and the FHIR gateway, you could get that event that essentially then populates the FHIR gateway and travel it through that way, or you could travel it and try to interpret it directly from SDA. We would have to create essentially a custom trigger to look for that type of event coming from upstream.
Thank you.
Up here.
Hi. At one point, you said something around the idea that the example is clearly patient-specific CDS, and you said for population health, you'd want to, and then I dozed off and missed what you said. Could you go into that a bit more?
About how you might use this for?
Where would you go, if not here, to do rules-based logic on population health?
Like Health Insight and the Analytics Solution Builder, are you referring to that, or?
That's what I'm asking.
Oh, so I think that there are a number of different ways to go about population level analytics. Again, I think that some of it would be performance dependent, right? So you could, again, using that idea of a virtual agent, call the rule on pick your number of patients, but you're certainly, if you had a discrete list, 1,000 patients, you're probably doing fine, but you want to run that rule that's intended for one patient data at a time over 2 million patients, we would have to think about what the performance implications of that are, with different cloud deployments and spinning up containers and things like that. It might be possible to do that, but we just haven't gotten there yet.
Okay. I have more, but I don't have time, so I'll call you.
All right. All right, and I think we're out of time. So thank you so much. If you have further questions, please feel free to contact me.